Ladies and gents, the other night I had a great conversation with lawyer Keith Wilson from Alberta. We were talking about the potential of Alberta separating from Canada and becoming its own country, or possibly even a state of the United States. Now, that conversation is published on the main channel. There's a link right over there, a card in the corner there. You can go watch that. But after that main conversation, we went on to have a Q&A session with the audience. And well, that went on even longer than the original conversation, and I thought it was very important that everybody hear this conversation. So, well, here it is. Here is the remainder of the Q&A from that video. All right, let's get into the second portion of this. Let's get into the Q&A, because I know there's a lot of people. The chat has erupted, and of course, for obvious reasons. And we're gonna get into this. I actually didn't touch on the idea of being a traitor. I hear that all the time.
It's if I check my email, it'll be full.
Yeah, right.
Let's deal with it. Okay, so the Supreme Court of Canada has issued a ruling. Google it. It's called the succession reference case. Quebec succession, and the Supreme Court of Canada has said that Canadian citizens living in a province have a choice. They can either be content to be in that province and that province be one of the provinces of Confederation, or if their government decides to hold a referendum, they can lawfully vote to legally leave the country as a province and become their own independent nation. So there's nothing traitorous about that. I very much wish at a cultural and a practical level that Canada still adhered to the principles that made me once a proud Canadian: true north, strong and free, respect for individual rights, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the rule
They've
of
gone
law.
so far from that.
Yeah. Hey, look, you remember, the other things I've done. I've represented former Premier Peckford on the travel mandate charter challenge for 6 million unvaccinated Canadians.
Yeah.
So don't get me started on that. And I know I didn't mean that to sound as provocative as it did.
No. I've had you've been on the show to talking
outrageous.
all about it.
I have challenged these things in our courts. I have brought together properly formulated legal challenges. I've seen the collapse of our institutions. I've also have represented and continue to represent a number of the key organizers or people who volunteered to help make the Freedom Convoy protest in Ottawa a success in 2022, and did the whole public inquiry thing into the Emergencies Act, and I'm still involved in a lot of those things. So I've seen how badly corrupted our country has become, how badly corrupted the Liberal government has been, with its scandal after scandal after scandal after scandal, how they've corrupted. We saw it today with CSIS. CSIS does nothing in view of the evidence that they had themselves about the political interference by China, the government of China, with Liberal members of Parliament and in the past elections. And then suddenly CSIS releases today some smear thing that maybe Poilievre there was political interference involving Poilievre in the last election, or the leadership vote involving India. Like, really, come on.
That is political interference.
Complete failure of the RCMP to investigate any of these scandals. Remarkable. The failure of the legacy media to report on them. And then all the weird stuff we've seen in the courts. So the Canada that I grew up in doesn't exist.
Fair enough. That's very fair. Got a question from Jackie Peterson. She says, how do we deal with the RCMP when we separate?
Easy. That's a good one. Thanks. So, so in Ontario and in Quebec, they have municipal police and they have provincial police.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's use Ontario. So if you're in rural Ontario and some, Bracebridge or somewhere like that, something falls, there's no local RCMP detachment.
No.
There's the local OPP detachment, provincial police, right? Mm-hmm. Now, if you're in Brampton or Hamilton, there'll be the city police, just like if you're in Edmonton or Calgary, there's the city police. So Alberta and Saskatchewan and BC are an anomaly in that we don't have provincial peace forces.
Mm-hmm.
The norm in central Canada is provincial police forces. You can drive around most parts of Ontario and you will not see an RCMP cruiser. You'll see OPP and municipal police, right? So all that Alberta would do is, and we've already been working towards it because we now have our provincial sheriffs, and you'll see, if you're driving between Calgary and Edmonton on our main highway, Highway 2, for every RCMP cruiser, you will see a provincial sheriff. So we're already transitioning, but it's very simple. So the RCMP, in my community where I live, we have an RCMP detachment. On the day after separation or the day before, a letter could go to all those RCMP constables and say, on this date, we're offering you a job. You can no longer be an RCMP officer, and you can become a member of the Alberta Provincial or the Alberta Police Force. And let us know yes or no, and send us your uniform size, and we'll have your uniform. And we just change, it's just like, have you ever seen a restaurant change? They changed the name sign, right? So we would change the RCMP symbol on the front of the building to Alberta Police Force. Super, not a big deal at all. The whole hierarchy that's there. So the RCMP in Edmonton, our K division, their headquarters are in Edmonton. That would become the headquarters for North and Central Alberta for the country of Alberta's police force.
So it's that easy. Like
the
same employees would just be doing the same job.
Yeah, I mean, if you've worked at a big company and the company gets bought out by another company, you still go to work and do your same job. You just, if you used to get a paper paycheck, there's a different logo on it. There's a different sign in front of the building. It's not like we would have to demolish everything. We would just flip it over.
Fair enough. Got this one from the Dune guy for 5. He says, if we don't get the parks, we'd just be the free cities of Calgary and Edmonton, and it wouldn't be worth it at all. Don't make my mountains go away, or don't take my mountains away. You addressed this obviously while we were chatting, that it's the crown land is actually provincial crown land. It's not federal crown land, and that there's a unique legal distinction on that.
Just over 2% of the land base of Alberta is under the jurisdiction of the federal government, and it's only the few national parks that we have and the 3 military bases. The rest of the land base in its entirety is either owned by the province of Alberta and under the control of the province of Alberta. And if it's owned by an individual, where I'm sitting now, then it's still under the control of the province. This idea that federal government has control over large land bases is not something that exists in the real world.
I can hear your dog's getting a little excited behind you there.
Yeah,
having some fun.
Yeah, he's scratching his bed to have a nap. I guess I'm boring him.
Too funny. So Revisades for 5 says, equalization and federal policies have been draining all the prosperities from Alberta, like the spice from the pumpkin in the fall. I think that's just a statement, not a question per se, but it's true. Yeah. It's absolutely correct.
It's remarkable. One of the things I thought about turning it around, I'd be interested in hearing from somebody from Ontario as to why they think if we were holding a referendum, what argument could they make me to persuade me to vote for staying in Canada? Like, what are you offering me, right? The RCMP, well, we already know that's easy. We just do our own provincial peace force. It's not like we're not paying for it. We already are. What are you offering me? And the answer is you're not. You're robbing my pocket, and you're making it harder for me and my kids to have a prosperous future.
I mean, it really, at the end of the day, that's this is why I bring this up, because it's such a hard sell to stay with the offer that's being laid out on the table. If America under Donald Trump says, Alberta, join us, come be a part of the United States, be a state, like statehood, whatever that would take. In fact, I want to ask you about that, but The idea being that that's such a way better deal. What would that actually take? So I understand like Alberta independence is one thing, and under the way the Constitution in the U.S. is put together, they could make. I think Trump could make it a territory. They could make Alberta a territory, but then it has to go to the Congress in order to reach statehood. What would the preamble be for that?
I can't remember the provision in their law, but there's one, and it's very simple, that their constitution allows for the addition of states. It does not allow an existing state to be broken into two, and it does not allow a state to take part of another state. But under their constitution, there's a mechanism for if Alberta were to become an independent country and Albertans were to vote to join the United States, there is mechanisms under their law right now to receive Alberta and make it a state. Or there's the potential for it to be a territory, or some other economic relationship.
Fair enough. Because I know that Puerto Rico has been on the list of things to be brought in as a state for a long time, and this has become a question that a lot of people are bringing up, saying, "Well, look at Puerto Rico; they're not being considered. The vote comes up periodically, and it doesn't happen." I think what a lot of people don't know is that this is a political contentious thing, because they know, like the Democrats know that the Puerto Rico is full of Democrat voters, and the Republicans largely want to vote that down every time it comes to the table. But I think Alberta would be a different story. I think if it came to the choice of Alberta coming in and saying, well, here's the vote, here's the option. Do you want to bring in a state that's largely would be independent on its own, brings a lot to the table when it comes to wealth for the nation, and hardworking people, all of this stuff. I think it's a much different story than Puerto Rico, and this is
we won't be asking for money.
Well, that's it. You're asking to have your money not be taken from you. I think is more the question there. Let's get to some more of these other ones. Crash TV says, question: how do you feel about having to sign up for selective service? ? Or seeing your children have to? Well, I'm guessing that's under the United States. I don't know.
Yeah, but the Americans don't have that, I don't know that I would have a problem with it, particularly if I was living in a country that was seeking to achieve the best for my children, that was supporting the prosperity and the success of the community, my community, and my neighbors and my friends. There'd be something to fight for. I'd have a great deal of concern if the current government did it, because everything they do seems to be ideological.
So, I mean, historically, they did have the draft. They had the draft for the Vietnam War.
And we've had conscription in Canada too.
And it was seen largely as a debacle. That was a big mistake. They received a poor morale in the service because of it, and I just don't see the chance of that happening again.
I think the question, with all due respect to the person who asked, is just a distraction.
Oh, that's a distraction. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. No one is saying that should happen, that will happen, or that it is happening. It's a way out there. What if? And I've answered it, even though it's a way out there.
So RC Lemereau for 5 says they're all thieves. It's a scam to divide Canada and build the country of North America. They're all globalists, including Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, I guess. What would you say to that?
Thank you for your support.
Elaborate.
No, I mean, it's just a provocative statement. It's a scam. This is suggesting there's some organized cabal and I'm part of theater and everybody else is part of theater. That's nonsense. There's real struggles going on. There's a lot of genuine concern about the Trump tariffs. I'm very concerned about them. I think they're a bad idea. I think retaliatory tariffs are even more stupid. This is a serious game. We're talking about the future for our children and our friends and our neighbors. And I don't think Danielle Smith is a globalist in any way.
So this has been a conspiracy theory that's been around for a long time. I remember hearing about this more than 20 years ago, this idea that they want to bring in the North American Union and have the Amero as the currency. That's been a long time conspiracy theory. I think this is largely a different thing. This is more of an organic. Canada's kind of falling apart. Where are all the pieces going to fall?
And I mean, when you're, I think, I've been happily married for 37 years, something like that.
Congrats.
So I don't have to do this, but I suspect, and just from, we all, it's over 50% of the people get divorced. So we all have people in our circles of life that go through divorces. And I suspect that one of the things that the spouse does that's not happy and is seriously thinking about divorce, they say, well, is there someone else there that would be better for me, that would lead to me having a better life, that I'd be happier in? And so some people are looking to the United States and Alberta. They're saying, if Alberta was part of the United States, I think that would be a better partnership. Some people find that concept offensive. That's fine. I'm not suggesting anybody has to agree with me. But what I do know is that the Supreme Court of Canada and the Clarity Act and the Provincial Referendum Act have said that if there's a vote, everybody gets a vote. And we got to respect the vote. So we'll see how this is sort of unfolding.
So I have a personal friend who's been frantically texting me, actually texting me as the live's been going on. He says, please ask him about auxiliary RCMP. British Columbia has tier 3 services, but the service has been deactivated in Langford by politicians. I don't know if there's a question there.
Well, I mean, from what I know about the RCMP, and it's a little bit, because I've negotiated some contracts over the years involving RCMP and their services, they have different kinds of RCMP. Often on a Friday night or a Saturday night, you'll see 2 RCMP in a car. One of them is a full RCMP that went through depot in Winnipeg and is full-fledged and has a surge. And another one's an auxiliary. They're kind of like a part-time quasi-volunteer type thing. I don't know if they get paid or not, but
I have no idea.
Yeah, it still exists as far as I know.
Oh, okay. I'm not that familiar with how the police services work. I do know the basics, like some municipalities have their own services, and then some of the provinces have their own provincial services, and then BC and Alberta have RCMP, which you've pointed out pretty well that it's a quick transition. It wouldn't be that difficult.
Yeah, and it's not the norm. So Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia. It's so funny. Some people, federal government was criticizing Alberta for thinking about having a provincial police force when Ontario has a provincial police force and Quebec has a provincial police force, our 2 largest population provinces. Newfoundland has a provincial police force, the Newfoundland Constabulary. So this is what, because we see the RCMP every day when you live in this part of the world, you just assume that's the norm. It's not the norm.
No.
The norm is to have the RCMP be the federal police and deal with a very select and narrow range of issues. And normal policing, criminal code, highway traffic safety act, all that stuff is done by the provincial police, which we don't have. And we have a surrogate. We have a replacement for that, which is the RCMP.
So why has it been so long? Like why hasn't Alberta just come and put forward the legislation to establish a Alberta police force?
There's some financial advantage because the federal government does pay a percentage of the cost of a police officer, of an RCMP officer. So there's a financial advantage, but it's also part of our cultural history. I mean, the RCMP, used to be called the Northwest Mounted Police. The Northwest Mounted Police. Then they became the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Where is the Northwest? Alberta used to be part of the Northwest Territories, the entirety, including most of all of British Columbia. So, Rupert's Land, etc., and then it became provinces. So the North, and why did the Northwest Mounted Police come west? There was a fella by the name of Rial who was accused of treason. And so there was the Rial Rebellion. And so they had to send the Northwest Mounted Police out west to control the Métis and others who were rising up against the government in Ottawa and central Canada. So it's just, what do they say? History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes.
It rhymes. Yeah, that's it. That's it. Revisades for 5 says the last Democrat governor in Texas was Ann Richards in the 90s.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So it's been a while. Yeah, of course, Alberta has had the NDP.
Probably wouldn't, if she were there today, she probably wouldn't meet the current standard for a Democrat in the United States.
I'd agree with you. I'd agree with you on that one.
You asked her how many genders there are, she'd probably say 2. So.
She'd probably say, "What are you talking about genders? There are 2 sexes."
Exactly.
Yeah, that's usually my sentiment there. D with a $10 super chat says Alberta Prosperity Project pre-register Alberta to speed up the vote collection to petition for referendum. What are your thoughts on that? Also, what's your thoughts on prep work for Constitution, a draft? Because exactly. As an independent or as a state, you would have to have a state constitution. This is a definite thing that would have to be ratified or brought into place.
Yeah, there would be, and it's not an insurmountable task. And we have a lot of learning from things in constitutions around the world that seem to have worked and seem not to have worked. So we'll have a big pool of knowledge and experience to draw from if we get to that point where a constitution needs to be drawn up. To answer the first question, the Alberta Prosperity Project is an organization. I don't know how many years they've been around for, but it's a number of years. And it's a very concerned group of Albertans with diverse backgrounds, including professionals and others, that have come together and believe that Alberta would be more prosperous being an independent country. And they've been working hard. They have a press conference tomorrow that they announced today, where they're going to be announcing some specific initiatives that I think have a lot of merit, from what I've read from the press release. And they do very good work, and I think people should get behind them. There's a number of groups out there. There's some groups that want to do this at a national level and form a national party. I'm sorry, that makes no sense to me at all. There's no pathway there. I mean, you could try and create one. Good luck with that, because any one province can block you. The nice thing about the Succession Act ruling or the succession ruling reference case of the Supreme Court of Canada and the Clarity Act and so on is it lays out such a clear, very straightforward, simple process. If it turned out events were such that Saskatchewan wanted to do this, or Manitoba, or even British Columbia, and I realize the difficulties there, given the difference between the Lower Mainland and people on the island versus the interior and the north, not a homogeneous situation at all. But any province can follow this methodology. I think it's a very democratic process. But I do encourage people to follow the Alberta Prosperity Project. They've got great resources on their website, lots of financial information, various feasibility studies, papers that have been done by various institutes on these issues. It's all there if you're looking for more information.
What do you know of Jeffrey Rath and his delegacy to Washington, D.C. to get Donald Trump's ear?
Well, I don't know a lot about it, but I do know that, and I think Mr. Rath will be discussing that tomorrow at the press conference as well. I'm not certain, but I believe he will. Is that I thought it was an interesting idea, is that rather than just sit back and talk amongst ourselves about, Albertans, about what we have to offer the United States, they said, hey, let's go down there and talk to them directly. So it'll be interesting to see how they make out. And, good on them.
All right. So that's, a completely independent thing from what you're working on.
Yeah, no, I'm just me. I'm just a dad. I'm just a lawyer. I'm a concerned Albertan. I'm a concerned Canadian. And it's something I've studied carefully, something I've had to think long and hard about because it's a big decision to make. But as I've explained to you and everybody listening, that it's obvious to me that what a better opportunity will be for my kids to have a more prosperous, and grandkids to have a prosperous and successful future. It's just obvious.
And the immediacy of it
that, I'm
as
deluding
well.
myself. I'm just deluding myself, and I'm not going to do that. And I always try and speak honestly and clearly, and that's what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, and the immediacy of it as well. That's the thing. So if Alberta became part of the United States or independent and adjacent to the United States, and obviously friendly relationship there, the benefits would be immediate. It's not like a 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road kind of prospect. It's like now.
Well, we'd have US dollar if we joined the United States, and it'd make traveling to the US cheaper. Disneyland wouldn't cost as much if you're taking the kids, and it would make cheaper traveling around the world too. So
yeah, absolutely. Somebody asking for $6.99 says, we are settled in Alberta. We only have PR, so permanent resident, with our son who has Alberta certificate. If this is what happens, what about people like us? Smooth or chaos? Would this be a good transition for people who are Canadian permanent residents living in Alberta?
Well, I think I'm not an expert on immigration law, but again, these things need not be extraordinary complicated. If a person is legally living and carrying on and living their life in Alberta under the Canadian rules, those rules can simply be adopted by the new government of Alberta to be the rules for that person to carry on living, being prosperous, and working in Alberta.
Is there any fears of like a mass influx of Canadians like rushing to Alberta to move in, but just before the transition, if it were to occur?
What do you think?
It's implied in the question. It's really
No, I think there would be. I think well, you see it in social media and other places. There's people in Ontario that are extremely frustrated. There's people in Quebec who are extremely frustrated, although far lower numbers in other provinces. We've seen it in the past when we've had a boom in our economy, primarily driven by oil. You start to see all the different license plates. It's just very common here. All the different provincial license plates start showing up, and people come to work.
And even when Alberta's remaining flat, but the other provinces are dropping down, they're shipping off to Alberta. We see like it's a measurable thing. People moving to Alberta because of economic reasons.
Sure, I mean, if you're a younger person and you're not afraid of hard work, when our economy's booming, you could come here and work and make a really good wage, 110,000, 130,000, whatever, and that's why we get the influx that we do. And if we get the growth, there's obviously going to need to be an influx of some people because we'll need to build things.
So would there have to be some stipulation if this came to a vote that there would be a deadline? You're either an Alberta resident or you're not, and you can't do it after this particular time?
I'd have to give that some thought, but there'd have to be some clarity around that. Yeah, there would be a clarity around, well, the vote would occur while Alberta is still a province, and then the effective date of when it became a nation would be subject to the negotiation with the other provinces, the federal government, and the First Nations. And the government of Alberta could announce rules around that in advance if that's how all these events were to unfold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is something these are the things that I think about, some of the logistics of how it all works. Diane Sylvain asking for $5. What is a clear majority in a referendum? Only question about Alberta separating, or can a referendum include trying to be a state? Thanks, Keith.
So I would think that if 60% of Albertans voted in favor of a referendum to separate, that would be obviously a clear majority. And I would not recommend it be a loaded question, because then it wouldn't be a clear question. I think what should happen is that if events continue to unfold, that this October, the Alberta government has a referendum on whether or not Alberta should separate. And then once the results of that vote are known, the day after, that the government make a decision as to whether it's going to hold a second vote on a separate question, which is, should Alberta enter into negotiations to join the United States? So that would be my advice. I know that's ambitious, but it's all doable.
Yeah, I could see it all being doable.
200 years ago, Alberta was not a province.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
Like this, it happened somewhere. It's not like, the earth was formed and there was this outline of this border and it was called Alberta. Like that's just not how it works. These are ebbs and flows of moments in time, of history, of aspirations of people and visions and leadership.
Neil from the Hill asked for 10. If it comes to a vote to leave Canada, what do you think? Will the influx of Canadians from the East want to join Alberta? I'm sure there will be an influx. So that's my question. Just doubling down on that one. So yeah, obviously there's economic incentive for people to come out. There's going to have to be a deadline. There's going to have to be some sort of, okay, you can come, but until this point forward, I'm guessing, is that like a framework of how things might work?
And I think it's not just economics though. What going through the government's overreaction to COVID did is make us really appreciate at a very deep level the importance of freedom, the importance of limitations on governments interfering and telling you how to live your lives. And that's a hallmark of Albertans, is that we believe there should be limits on the role that government has in our lives. We don't want to wake up in the morning and have the government tell us every single thing we can and can't do that day and tuck us in at night and promise to keep us safe, because we know governments can't actually do that. They're too incompetent and increasingly corrupt. But Albertans want to have freedom of choice of the decisions they make in a day and how they live their lives. And Albertans realize that sometimes we're going to fall down and as individuals, and we're going to get up and dust ourselves off, and we're going to put our head into the wind and our shoulder to the wheel, and we're going to move forward. That's our culture, and that's our history of homesteaders and ranchers and so on, oilmen. So I think some people will be attracted not just because of the obvious economic advantages, because they want that freedom too. They don't want government dictating every aspect of their lives. And there's clearly a lot of people in Ontario and Quebec in particular that absolutely want the government, to govern them harder and look after every aspect of their lives. So they can stay in Ontario and Quebec.
Yeah, that was the big shock I found, 3 going on 3 years ago now, how many people were actually eager to have the government come in and tell them how to live.
And disappointed when the mask rules got lifted.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a rift, there's a divide there in sentiment. So I guess those people, if you're thinking about it and you're in Ontario or Quebec or the Maritimes, maybe make that move sooner than later. I guess the cultural identity that you identify with might be moving on. Corey 2146 for 5 says, "Can we see your pup?"
Buster, come here. Come here. I want to see you. Come here. He's a beast. Come here, buddy.
Oh, he's a beast.
He's a beast. Come on.
Oh, look at that. Nice.
He's 50 pounds. He's a purebred Stafford
wow.
bull terrier.
He's a meatball.
He is a meatball. He's a knucklehead.
Oh, man.
So there you go.
What old champ.
Yeah, that's Buster.
Oh, that's good to see. That's don't get to see that every day.
Thanks, Corey.
That's amazing. Yeah, absolutely. To fight you with a $10 super chat says, why couldn't Alberta take the Hong Kong route in that they were independent and became very wealthy with not a very large population, 7 million people. The UK and China left them alone and they prospered. Well, I mean, I think at the end of that story, it's China takes them over, but
Yeah, it didn't end well. The story started good.
I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Keith?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of dissidents in jail there.
Yeah.
Rounded up. The reality is, I guess the question illustrates the world's your oyster, that there's so many options, but critically, we don't have to stay in the abusive relationship we're in Alberta. And more Albertans are realizing that. There could be a different economic union with Canada. There could be an economic union with the United States. Alberta could be full on independent and develop economic ties with countries around the world that see the value that we have to bring and see the value of our resources.
So before we were streaming, before we got streaming, you said, wonder what the chat's going to look like. And it's overwhelmingly positive in my estimate. So it is interesting because given the subject matter.
Is there pictures of nooses for being treasonous or anything like that?
None of that. Now, of course, you always have your defectors, but I'm seeing a lot of this right now. We love the dog. So,
famous, yeah.
It's the way to go. So that's awesome. So yeah, rest assured, the comments are actually quite fantastic. We've got quite a good community here on YouTube, and it's a mixed community because I think there's a lot of Americans in this audience now. It's been growing. The American audience has been growing because, and I think like a lot of the people who don't like my sentiment as being a traitor for just happening to be a dual citizen. I was born this way. I can't do anything about it. But a lot of the people who were turned off by that have already filed out. There have been, really interestingly, there's been some exoduses, but overall growth is still on the rise. So that's always good to hear.
And just to add to the controversy, Buster, my dog, he's from Chicago.
you're bringing in immigrants.
That's right.
That's awesome. D for $2 saying wacky gents, super chat questions. A big old wink on that one. Gordo for 10 says, if Alberta is going to declare independence, we ought to leave the crown too and become a republic. How would Mr. Wilson formulate the clear referendum question?
First slowly, then quickly. It would, I don't want to draft it right here, but I mean, it's not that complicated. It would have to be something that's not prone to confusion or misinterpretation. So it'd be something as simple, could be something as simple as, do you support Alberta becoming an independent country? Yes or no?
Right, because if you add more to it, then it's convoluted. People are saying, well, I was voting on the second clause of that statement and not the first clause.
I'm not keen on using the word succession, because what does that mean? Succession actually can have multiple interpretations. It does in our dictionary. So anyway, but that's easy. That's something that can be resolved fairly easy.
So wouldn't it be implied that if Alberta became its own country, as per the referendum's question, it would be implied that it would no longer be under the crown, correct? Or is that not an inference?
That would be the direct result, yes. But then it's conceivable that Alberta could negotiate with the king to continue to be part of the Commonwealth if that's what the decision was. Yeah, I know, I'm not going there.
This question came up yesterday because I didn't hear, but Donald Trump mentioned something about joining the Commonwealth. I forgot to look it up, but did you hear anything about that?
I didn't actually.
Or was that a joke? Because that sounds like a joke to me.
Yeah, I can't see that. Not the Americans. They wouldn't be doing the bow stuff.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Queen Camilla.
There you go. RC Lemero for 5 says, I appreciate the work you did with the convoy, bringing back some freedom. I disagree with your assessment about uh, disparaging your point of, without disparaging your point of view. This is a respectful disagreement.
No, and that's fine. And it's a very personal decision that we all have to make, right? And I respect that. And whatever the vote would be, I would respect. It's not a decision I came to lightly. I know others who were completely against the concept a number of years ago that very opposed to it, that now fully embrace it. And I know some people that are totally opposed to it, and they're still opposed to it. So they want to commit Canada no matter what.
So you and I talked privately before, and I expressed this is long, like we're going on a while ago now, and I've expressed my my opinion that a good moving forward, even if Canada wanted to remain Canada, to balkanize the balkanization of Canada in order to scrap the federal government and then only to come back in an entirely new arrangement if Canada wanted to remain the geographical area that it currently is, because it's the arrangement with Ottawa, with the federal government, that's so soured, and it feels like there's no way out of that. The power is all held in few hands, and no one's going to give it up. And until there's a separation, there can't be a new reunification. Is that a fair assessment?
And even then, they might want to hang on more desperately to the power they have over the colonies, you know? So if they lose Alberta, they may want to squeeze more out of Saskatchewan and Manitoba and British Columbia and be even more resistant to some accommodation.
But then that's the balkanization that I'm talking about, because that's when they would want, then the other provinces are like, this is worse now. We got to get out of here.
Yeah, that's exactly what could happen. But, you know, maybe it was never meant to be. You know, maybe this is not the ideal union, right? Maybe what we have in Canada today is not the ideal union. I know they thought we were supposed to have the House of Commons, which is representation by population. And then we were supposed to have the Senate, the Canadian Senate, which was representation by region. And it was supposed to counterbalance to force a negotiation of the various forces so that compromises and non-oppressive policies of one area of the country would come out. You couldn't have that. But instead, our Senate has always been a patronage pit, an absolute patronage pit. If you look at the instances where it's voted against a government bill, the answer is largely no. There was these 2 or 3 little instances in modern history where they voted because something was about to happen before an election and they wanted it to be deferred. But other than those 3 anomalies, they've never voted down a government bill. So the original design has never come into fruition. The original design was that the populist sentiment of Central Canada and its raw power because of its population would be tempered by some respect for the regions through the Senate. Because if they passed the bill in the House of Commons, they couldn't get it through the Senate. So they couldn't just screw Alberta. Now they can screw Alberta. And that's what they're doing.
Well, and they could probably do that even with a Pierre Poilievre majority or supermajority because of the structure of the Senate now after Justin Trudeau. That's a real fear.
Yeah, and not only that, I think it's more base in the sense that if you want, you know, some people particularly that are more conservative and more on the right of the political spectrum in Canada in the last months, in particular weeks, have been very frustrated with Pierre Poilievre because they felt he's pivoted to the center. Well, if you want to get elected, you got to be responsive to the views of Quebec and Ontario. That's why you commented earlier. There's no way he's going to take away $13 billion in transfer payments from Quebec. And the other thing that I find troubling is, and I was watching this closely over the last 3 years since 2022, when you're sawing this slippage in support for the Liberals and increasing, you see all these polls come out and they'd have the big blue bar at the top, and then the red would be the Liberals, and then the orange would be the NDP. And people were getting all excited, like, look at the delta between where the Liberals are and the Conservatives. Wow, wow, wow. And then I would maybe pop into a Twitter space or something. I'd say, can you add together I'm driving, add together the red and the orange. What do you get? And they go, oh my God.
Oh, yeah.
It's more than the Conservatives, right? Well, what am I getting at here? There's more people in Ontario and Quebec for sure that support the policies of the Trudeau Liberals than don't support them, even everything we've seen happen. The majority of Canadians are more left of center than most Albertans, for example. So we have a very significant cultural divide in our country that I question. I don't know whether it's sustainable, and it's really manifesting itself right now.
Absolutely, it absolutely is. And well, we saw that those gains evaporate anyway. One thing I want to push back on though is Pierre Poilievre, in the height of his popularity, has had and the height of the unpopularity of the Liberals, the Quebec province only went towards the Bloc Québécois. They did not go towards the Conservatives. So I would say that there is no reason whatsoever for him to pander to any of their needs, any of what they have to say, because they clearly are not a voting demographic for the Conservative Party. I would throw that out.
I'm not meaning to advocate or recommend or lobby for what he should do. I'm more trying to describe the landscape that manifests itself, right? And that's
I'm pontificating on what he should do.
I just wanted to create that distinction.
Yeah, it's very different, and yes, that distinction exists. So let's go on. Yard Prep saying, why isn't Sask included in any of the talks? First line of defense. Why? I see a lot of people are including Saskatchewan with the Alberta movement. But is that a formal thing, or is that just people in Saskatchewan saying, take us with you?
Well, two things. One is, I believe clearly, if you look at the comments that Premier Moe has made and sentiments that are coming increasingly and more loudly from Saskatchewan, I suspect that if Alberta moved in this direction, that Saskatchewan would as well. But the reason why I don't talk about that a lot is I don't feel I can, because I'm not a Saskatchewan resident. I'm an Alberta resident. So I try not to put words into their mouths. But there's clearly a strong increasing sentiment in Saskatchewan as well of frustration towards these harmful, deliberate policies that are deliberately harming Saskatchewan and Alberta.
That's absolutely a fair assessment, a fair way of
look what, oh boy, think about Trump. So now if he gets Alberta and Saskatchewan, he gets the world's third largest reserve of oil and gas in the world, with an existing infrastructure tying it to his country. He gets, all the forestry, both in Saskatchewan and Alberta. He gets massive agricultural production capability, livestock and so on, grains, oil seeds. One of the largest reserves, if not the largest, I'm not sure of that, but one of the largest reserves of potash, which is fertilizer to grow food and other things. One of the largest reserves of uranium for nuclear power and all of those things. Like, holy smokes, man. Eastern Canada is just reckless in how they're treating the West.
Absolutely. I can't disagree with a single thing you just said. I don't even have anything to add. David Smith for 5 says, I live in S Border City. I'm not sure where that is. Lloydminster. Okay, yeah, Alberta.
Yeah.
And Saskatchewan borders us. Will they come with us? So another of the similar sentiment there.
Yeah, I think. I don't know if he's asking us or saying it, but either way, that's what we just talked about. That I think, and even there's the potential for Alberta and Saskatchewan to become a country, and it can have 2 provinces. They can make the capital city of the country Lloydminster and have the Capitol building straddle the border, just like Meridian Street does there now with the big orange poles. And the capitals of the 2 provinces within the new country could be in the two capital cities with the legislative buildings that we already have.
So not much new. It would just
Yeah,
be
not like it's just, it doesn't, one of the things that I've thought through, because I've been involved in a lot of legislative drafting processes over the years and lawmaking things and systems before I found myself dealing with freedom issues in convoy and COVID. And because of my background working in government and political science degrees and all that, when I look at these things, they're actually not that complicated. They're all totally doable. But for most people, they're like, oh, how would we deal with how would we deal with the crown land? And another one I love is that some people, I don't think it's many, but some people actually think that healthcare is done by the federal government.
it's provincial. It's absolutely
tell
provincial.
you the precise number of frontline doctors, frontline hospitals, frontline hospital beds, frontline nurses that the federal government has. 0. Healthcare is a provincial responsibility. We do have a federal role, but it's in the Canada Health Act in setting standards and prohibiting private care, private paid for care, and in providing funding. But other than that, every hospital, another one that people don't think of, airports.
But wait, they're only funding, the federal government's only funding it because you give because you don't have the own power of your taxation, right? So you're paying the federal government money, and then they're just giving it back to you to dole out to healthcare, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
It's our money.
And then
back. Yeah. And in
then
Alberta's case, they keep a whole big chunk of it.
They keep more of it than they give back.
We could have MRI machines at 7-Elevens and at McDonald's restaurants if they weren't keeping all of our money. But here's another one: airports, federal or provincial?
I couldn't tell you.
What do you
I don't
think?
know how that.
If you had to guess, it's okay to be wrong. I'll be gentle on you.
So you'll be gentle, thank you. So the I would assume that an international airport would be under federal jurisdiction, and a domestic airport would be provincial, or even municipal. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So airports, Transport Canada regulates the aviation safety. NAV Canada makes sure the planes don't crash into one another and land at the right spot. But the legislation supporting the Edmonton Airports Authority legislation and the Calgary Airports Authority, it's provincial. The people who are appointed to the board who runs the airport are provincial. The land was provincial land that was bought by the airport authority. Everything about it's provincial. So the only thing that would change is the aviation safety. So we would go to the guys that work in the Edmonton office and the Calgary office at the Transport Canada and say, hey, Alberta's becoming a country. How would you like to work for Alberta's, Transport Safety Board, right? And so on. So many of these things, when I look at the list of all of the functions of the province under the Constitution, Section 92 and so on, the federal government has very limited roles of responsibility, but the way they've conducted themselves and used transfers and tying funding to programs, we think that the federal government has a huge role in our lives, and they don't. They don't. The courthouse, federal or provincial? Provincial.
Yeah, provincial.
Province built it. The province facilitates it. The province staffs it. The superior court judges and the Court of Appeal judges in our provinces are appointed by the federal government, but they're paid for by the province. They're housed in the court by the province. It's all provincial. Most of the
on the airport question, the one thing I thought would be federal would be the international portion of the airport. Is that not?
Well, yeah, it would be, because that would be to do with the immigration. But I mean, that's just
that's an office.
It's an office, and it's a boundary. Well,
but that's it.
Yeah. So it's just easy. It's somebody having a meeting and changing signs, right?
Gotcha.
Yeah. So like
it's like having an embassy in your province. That would be a federal building, but it's not that the land that's on is federal land.
Correct. So when I go through these things, jails, hospitals, schools, universities, they're all provincial. And the highways, provincial, right? Even the Trans-Canada Highway, it's provincial. It has a federal designation, so it gets specific funding. But when you drive on it, you're driving on provincial crown land within the right of way and where the blacktop is, and you're have to follow the Provincial Highway Traffic Safety Act, whether I'm in Alberta, and then when I'm in BC, I got to follow yours, and there's a different rule on my kingpin length so that I don't come into oncoming traffic when
which
I'm
is which is ridiculous. I don't like the fact that they haven't streamlined a lot of that stuff.
Well, but it makes sense in BC though, right? Because if they in Alberta, there's very little tight turns, and so you can allow the trailer to be longer. It doesn't have to swing into the oncoming traffic. But if you're driving the Fraser Valley and you allow that same kingpin length to your rear axle, you're coming into my lane, and I don't like that. So there's a really good example of a logical rule that they had to tighten it up because of the twisty turny roads in BC because of your mountains.
Oh, okay. And then you guys didn't comply because you have
fast on that. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, right down to the bottom.
Yeah. Okay, I'll get into the weeds. I'll totally get into the weeds with anybody on any of this stuff. Trish Proof for 279 says, how would this affect people on the pension plan?
In Alberta?
Well,
they'd be way better off.
So in Alberta, because I know that there's been efforts already to separate the pension plan from the rest of Canada. And of course, the Canadian government, the federal government's in disarray of that because all those funds would be
in big trouble. So all of the economists that have looked at this and the think tanks have all said Alberta would be better off their pension if Alberta got out of, just like Quebec had its own pension plan instead of opted out of the Canadian pension plan, that Albertans would receive more money on their pension checks. Where the economists disagree is by how much. Okay. Some say it's a very large amount. Some say it's not as much, but they all say they would be better off. And the reason is our demographics. We have a younger population, part of the entrepreneurial draw of Alberta, right? So we have a younger, more productive population. So we're paying in more, and there's more people who are retired or nearing retirement age in Quebec and Ontario. So they need our young pool to keep working, to keep the money going into the plan to pay them as they enjoy their retirement years. So no problem.
Is there any fear of losing, like a brain drain, if Alberta becomes a 51st state, that a lot of the young and ambitious entrepreneurs would say, I'm out of here. I'm going to go to a state, another one of the states?
I suspect, but Alberta also has a lot to offer. We've got a mix of opportunities. Like you look at Calgary, you can, you're right beside the mountains. Very young, progressive city. So yeah, I mean, that's a danger. But it's happening right now. I mean, I have a number of my kids' friends have left Canada. They've gone to Texas, they've gone to Florida, they've gone to other states because they concluded that they just didn't have a future here, and they're excelling, they're doing wonderful. But not everybody can do that, because of the immigration rules. So yeah, that's a possibility. But I think actually you might have a lot of Americans coming up, especially given the fact that we have, the different analysis that have been done will be richer than Dubai because of the wealth we have. And if we can set it free, we have a government that is deliberately sabotaging our economic success out loud in the open.
Yeah, I suppose it's kind of like if you build it, they will come. If you allow for it to happen, and the will is to then start building things, then a lot of people might end up flocking into Alberta to help for the infrastructure build at that point. So that's an interesting concept there. D with a $20 super chat says, no question, just my thank you for inviting Mr. Wilson. You and me have quite a few differences, but they are all in the foreign policy. Keep up the great work and drive safe. Yes, I have to drive safe. I need to drive safer these days.
Yes.
Man, I got pounded like so bad by that. I've never been hit by an airbag. It is awful.
Isn't it wild? I had just after it was in January when the convoy arrived in Ottawa. I was driving back from my lake property on the Sunday night, and I was thinking about my big week ahead with this lawsuit I had against the federal government. And a deer jumped. I was coming up over an overpass, and it jumped right over the guardrail and over the snowbank. Landed. I didn't even see it. My son. Next thing I knew, it was just all white and impact and stop. Because when those airbags go off, you know what I mean, right? Like it
hurts.
And it was funny because my immediate thought was, it was dark out. My interior lights all came on, and that white powder's floating around. It usually sounds like it was in the day. So I immediately thought, have I died and gone to heaven? But I went, wait a minute, I'm a lawyer. I couldn't have gone to heaven. Anyway, but then I thought, okay, wait a minute. Trudeau's really pissed off because I just filed this lawsuit against him and on behalf of Peckford and 6 million Canadians and everything else. And maybe he had an Apache helicopter fire a Hellfire missile at me. And then I realized we don't even have an Apache helicopter, so it can't be that. So I said to my son, of course, this was all like a second and a half, but all your brain does races. I said to my son, what happened? He goes, you hit a deer, right? But wow, the violence of those airbags, it's something.
Oh man. I work around them.
Stop. Like it's just, you have that momentum and you just stop. Yeah.
It's over. Yeah. My glasses blew apart.
That I don't have my thumb or my hand by that thing on the steering wheel.
It hurts so bad.
Did it almost blow your hand off? Yeah.
Hands were like, and like all the muscles in my body are completely sore.
Yeah. In my head, I had a concussion for a few days, and then I got the phone call to go to Ottawa. So it's like, oh my God, this is a crazy life.
What a life we live. Yeah, exactly. Glided finch. Is that a bird? Okay, glided finch. Great name. For 5 says, will an Albertan state want to be the 51st star on our flag, or will you just want to be a leaf? That might be a deal breaker. Great stream. I like that.
Well, I guess both the United States and Alberta could hold a referendum on that specific question.
I like Donald Trump's sentiment. He's like, oh, Canada, keep it. The flag, keep it. I like it. It's great.
Did he say those things? I didn't hear that.
Yeah, he said those. And I don't know. Like, I don't know how much he means about it, but I think there is a real chance of Alberta separating. This is a reality of the situation. Studio 778 for $6.99 says, if a referendum passed, how would the federal government respond given likely court challenges, and how do you see that situation unfolding? Would they challenge it and say, nope, it's not happening?
Well, good luck with that, because the Supreme Court of Canada has already ruled. It's a very clear ruling. Everybody can read it. Google it. The 1998 reference case on succession, Quebec succession. They've laid out exactly the legal steps to be followed. I've described following those. The federal government since codified that in statute through the Federal Clarity Act. Google that, read it. It's not a very difficult read. We would follow those steps. And then the province has implemented the referendum legislation that both the Supreme Court of Canada and the Clarity Act direct need to be in place. So everything's legally blessed. I think there would be legal skirmishes, much in the way that when a divorcing couple is fighting over custody of the dog or the steak knives from the wedding, or custody of the children, or division of matrimonial property, or support payments that they find themselves having to have them resolved by a judge. So I would expect that there would be litigation on very specific issues and arbitration and other processes. But that's why we have courts.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think Carney would want to let go of that once he gets his hands on it. But what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Alberta will make their own decisions. That's great. Diane Sylvain for 20 says, from one Albertan to another. If I'm dyslexic, so if it's a typo, I will read it exactly how it is.
That's okay.
So from one Albertan to another, as a retired federal crown prosecutor, do you agree, Keith, the best future for the USA is their Bill of Rights and maybe being a republic? Thanks. I think for the future, I guess that's the future in the USA, or a future for Alberta.
Yeah, I think
because they have the Bill of Rights.
I think what Diane's asking is, what things do I find appealing about the structures they have in the United States? And one thing that my experience litigating the charter challenges and being involved in other litigation relating to the government's overreaction during COVID and restriction of Canadian rights is that I don't believe the documents and the institutional structure, political or otherwise, are as important. I've come to learn, and this will be a provocative statement as a lawyer in particular, that I don't think they're as important as the culture and the views of the people. Because the only way that the federal courts were able to dismiss the travel mandate charter challenge, where over 6 million Canadians' charter rights were fundamentally, glaringly, and blatantly breached,
Absolutely,
was because they felt they were doing what was right for public sentiment. And so I think at the end of the day, the culture of a people and their values are actually more important than the institutional structures. I think there are institutional structures that have fundamental advantages and are less prone to abuse or slippage. And I think the Americans have some of those. But at the end of the day, if the people are going to tolerate government overreach, if a majority of people are going to accept government overreach and the violation of their citizens' rights, then it doesn't matter. The institutions won't be there. That's what we've seen happen. So
you're saying, I want to get you correct on this. So even with the Constitution of the United States, if they didn't have a people that were willing to enforce it or stand behind it, that it would fall apart entirely.
Yeah,
it's the culture of the U.S. that holds
I think the U.S. Bill of Rights is a general reflection of the values and the ethos and the culture of Americans. And so if you just have those documents, they're just pieces of paper with ink on them, or digits on our computer screens, or these things now, our phones. If you just, without having the values of the people reflecting those things, the institutions won't work. And we saw that during COVID. We saw that with all the things that continue to happen to this day. Next week in Ottawa, Tamara Leach and Chris Barber are going to get their verdict on the criminal charges where the Crown's seeking to put both of them in jail, or each of them in jail rather, for 10 years, right? Like, we're not through this. They're being sued for $290 million for participating in the largest peaceful protest and public assembly, a peaceful assembly in Canadian history. So I don't think at the end of the day that I hear on Twitter a lot, we're like, oh, if we could just get rid of the Commonwealth and make it this, or we could just get rid of the Westminster model, everything will be fine. I disagree. If the majority of the population still has a viewpoint that you don't think is a good one, or good for you and your family and your neighbors, those, just changing the institution isn't going to do a thing.
Right.
What do they say? It used to say one of the best constitutions back in the Soviet Union, one of the best constitutions ever written. And if you read it, it's just amazing. It's the one in the Soviet Union, the Russian Constitution, right?
Really?
Oh yeah, yeah. But it wasn't enforced. It was ignored because of everything that was going on. So that's why I think it's more important about what our shared values are than I do. These other things are important. I'm not trying to say they're not important, but I don't think they're as important as the shared values.
Wow, that's a really, really interesting sentiment. I'm gonna keep that one close to heart for sure. Let's move on. Angus for $6.99 says, you own a Stafford, that automatically makes you a good person. Best breed ever. That's great. And you can see the avatar is a Stafford. There you go.
So, yeah. Oh yeah, right. Yeah, he's got a Stafford.
Yeah.
So yeah, next week you're gonna have Buster on. He's gonna sit in the chair. He vocalizes. So yeah, he'll do a special with Buster. Yeah.
D for $2 says, well, everything is better than the status quo. Yeah. Yeah, the status quo sucks. It's not very good.
It's not sustainable. Like, come on. We got to give our kids and our grandkids a future here. It's time to step up.
Yeah, buck up and make this happen. Rabbi Sadies for $5 says, as Diane said, King Chucky 3 Wait, what? King Chucky 3. Now, I guess the third. Now the most more climate goals put forward a letter to Trump join the Commonwealth, as I understand. Okay, so this was okay. So I guess King Charles gave the invitation to join the federal or to join the Commonwealth, and Trump was probably joking about it.
When Prime Minister Tier, whatever his name is, the UK went and had a meeting with Trump right after Zelensky was there and they had that blow up. He presented a letter with the sealed, wax sealed from King Charles, inviting King Charles, inviting Prime Minister or President Trump to come to England and, have a royal visit with the horses and the regalia. There's that.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if there's anything more out there that I've missed where someone has mused about joining the Commonwealth or whatever. I don't know, but I guess it could be.
I don't think there's any chance of that ever since tea went into the Boston Harbor.
That's a good point. They had that opportunity. They took a different route.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that just cracks me up. Studio 778 for $6.99. With all the liberal scandals and slogans or signs of foreign influence over cover up, why no RCMP charges? Is this political interference, as QCKC, the King's Council? Can you say? Are you able to comment or pontificate on that?
With all the liberal shows and signs of foreign influence cover up, why no RCMP charges? This is political interference. I can say what I think it needs to be said, and I will, despite my King's Council designation as a lawyer. And I am struck. If you look at my Twitter posts, a number of times when a new scandal would break, and I would push it and I'd repost it with a quote, and I would add RCMP's Twitter handle, and I'd like, excuse me, RCMP, may we hear from you on this?
Right.
Are you looking into this? I'm not expecting them to reply, but I mean, come on, man, what's going on here? It's remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable. And part of the problem we have, and we explored this and tried to expose it during the public inquiry into the Invocation of the Emergencies Act, the 2 months I was under subpoena to be in Ottawa during October and November 2022, which is, and Brendan Lucky explored this in his cross-examination of a number of ministers, including the Federal Attorney General Lamenti and Blair and others, and Commissioner Lucky, which is, the head of the RCMP at the time was Commissioner Lucky, and she serves at the pleasure of the Prime Minister. So he can literally pick up the phone on an afternoon at 2:00 and say you're fired. So at every turn, she's got to be super sensitive to keep him happy. That's not a good idea at all. So is she really going to investigate him and want to keep her job and not get that phone call? Come on. So in the past, we've had a level of integrity and honor in our system where elected officials didn't want to go there. But now, look what's going on. You can make an allegation against some other political party and they'll investigate it. But oh no, not the Liberals. Not the Liberals.
But I think this is going on across Canada. It's everywhere. Whether it's we see this now with the drug trade, with fentanyl in Canada. We see this with, and that's with the RCMP in British Columbia. I've been commenting about this like nonstop. Why do you think Trump doesn't trust that we're moving in the right direction when he says fentanyl is a big issue, when we're busting labs that are like the largest labs ever recorded in Canadian history, and there are no arrests? Nobody's getting busted. Like, who's getting paid off? Who's
money laundering scandal that you had in British Columbia with the casinos?
Yeah.
Like,
why aren't they fixing the legislation so that they can make this illegal? There's no incentive for them to do that.
I don't
know.
It's a legislation problem. I didn't. Last time I checked, there wasn't drug money laundering is legal in Canada Act. So
okay. Well, if it's illegal, why aren't they busting it?
Hey, they seized the remaining donations from the Freedom Convoy. The Freedom Convoy raised over $23 million in 3 weeks in donations. All of it but $5 million went back to the donors. The government seized that money, tracked it all down on the basis that it was proceeds of crime, either terrorist activity or drug proceeds. They were able to do it for people donating to truckers, but oh no, not what's been happening. So this is why it's so discouraging to see what's happened to our country.
I can't disagree with that, and I think this is a large part of why Donald Trump is putting so much pressure on Canada with the tariffs. And I have to explain this every time. There are two sets of tariffs. There's the punitive 25% tariffs for being bad neighbors, and then there's the retaliatory tariffs that aren't coming into effect until April 2nd. And people are trying to make it sound like Donald Trump is out to lunch, doesn't know what he's doing, doesn't know what he's talking about. It's intentional that they're conflating the two things. But I think a lot of this corruption is a big portion of it, even if he doesn't come out straight up and say it. Because I mean,
well, and irrespective of, even let's say if Trump wasn't the president, does the level of corruption that's going on around us that we can see, does that bode well for our children?
Absolutely not. No, absolutely not. But there's no incentive for the people in that structure to change it because they're the recipients of it. And
they're beneficiaries of it. And that seems to be the case. Right. So, but CSIS won't do anything about it.
Because CSIS also works at the pleasure of the prime minister. This is where it's all like crazy. Like, how does this work? So CSIS knew about the foreign interference and couldn't do nothing about it because the only consult that they could give was to the prime minister. And if the prime minister just sits on that information and doesn't do anything, am I wrong? Am I wrong in saying that?
I don't know the nuances, but what I do know is everything's broken. These systems are broken.
From what I understand on that case is the reason why whistleblowers went to the media was because the prime minister was briefed on all of this stuff and sat on it and did nothing. And so they had to go, outside of their purview, break the law and give this information to people because these people were more patriotic towards Canada than the prime minister. This is what I'm saying. Yeah. And that's my opinion, obviously, on that. But if that's the case, then the whole structure is wrong.
Well, I don't know if the structure is wrong. I mean, parts of it can be wrong. But again, it's back to this, are these the values that we accept? And we've seen such levels of corruption, particularly with the Green Slush Fund, with all of these other funds. Andy Lee's done a great job. Others have a great job, where they actually go, okay, let's go check out this address for this outfit that received a $50 million.
Oh, that was Tracy Wilson. Yeah, she went out to one of those. She did.
Yeah, a number of people have. So,
yeah,
this can't go on. I'm just so fed up with it. And I think Alberta has way better opportunities elsewhere.
Absolutely. KC, Kamala Carney, Canada, with Super Chat says, Scott passed a bill saying Saskatchewan can't join the U.S.
I don't believe that's true.
Yeah, I know in Manitoba they had some bill, and I tweeted out about it saying that.
Well, if he did, let's assume he did. What does that mean? So,
is it binding?
Well, no, there's this concept of parliamentary supremacy, okay? And it applies to a legislature and the federal parliament, which is no present legislature or present parliament can bind a future one. So if Scott Moe in fact passed such a law, when they hold their next provincial election, another party could come in, take him out, or a new premier come in the same party and pass a law repealing that law or pass a law making the opposite. So what? Even if it's true, it'd be symbolism. It'd be Scott Moe saying under no circumstances do I want Saskatchewan to become part of the United States. Well, good for you. You only have the right to say that as long as you're premier, and you're not going to be premier forever.
So all that tells me is that the real sentiment within the public is for it, that they would have to try to draft some legislation to say that we're not ever going to do that. Because why would they ever do that if the public wasn't absolutely in favor of it?
Right. And there's lots of examples on law books where the Alberta Water Act is an example that just comes to mind, where there's a provision in there that says no water can be exported from the boundaries of Alberta, either to the provinces, territories of the US, without a special act of the legislature. Well, the Notley government could have amended the Water Act to delete that section, to repeal it, right? So it's just a side note here. When the decision was made, when Trudeau made his bogus decisions to prorogue the Parliament so there could be a leadership review and a pause because he didn't like the fact that there was a filibuster going on to force his government to produce documents to show their corruption.
Yeah.
With the Green Slush Fund scandal and other scandals. I noticed on social media and elsewhere, people were like, oh, this is awesome. The good part of it, it's bad, but the good part is all these censorship bills that the federal government had in the queue and these other really bad laws, they die on the order paper.
Yeah.
And I got the impression that some people thought that meant they died forever, and they don't. I think
they can be reintroduced. That's all it takes.
Reintroduce it. So I've been involved in the past in legislative initiatives for industry and other clients and groups in government, and we try and get a bill through, and it's called Bill, just make up a number, Bill 22, making up a number. And then there's a shakeup politically, a leadership review, and then the government decides to call a snap election. They prorogue, Bill 22 dies, and then the next government comes in the next session, they reintroduce, and it's Bill 7. So this idea that those laws were gone and could never come back, no, that is not how it works. They just come back with a different number because of the principle of parliamentary supremacy.
And in quick succession, I mean, Bill C-11 that passed, that was a censorship bill. It was the bill to mess with the algorithms, basically try to make them so the government can get in there and stymie people's ability to see things on YouTube and whatnot. Came in as Bill C-10, and it was squashed. And everybody raised awareness about it, and then immediately they just reintroduced it as Bill C-11. That's it.
That's all they got to do, and it's all. They introduce it. This bill's read a first time. They don't read the whole bill. They say dispense with reading. So member of parliament stands up. I'm giving Bill C7 first reading. They can literally sit back down. And I'm going to give Bill C7 second reading. Okay, now motion to go to committee of the whole. All right, a little bit of debate. Okay, motion to come out of committee of the whole. That's where they do their amendments. Okay, let's go to third reading. Oh, Bill's read 3 times. All right, boom, off to the lieutenant governor if it's provincial, or governor general. Signed, roll or assent. Boom, law. That's all it takes.
That's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. Let's hammer through some more of these questions here. Kamala Carney, Canada, also with another question saying, how much are transfer payments if you pay people from other provinces to come to Alberta? They take the transfer payments, vote against us, and collect a check.
Good luck.
Good luck. Good luck.
You're gonna be beating Elon Musk to Mars if you can pull that off.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
It's just not a reasonable. Sorry, I'm not trying to be rude to anybody, but that would, people are going to take that much time out of their day. You're going to find money to pay them to do it, to vote and back, and that's not going to happen.
Fair enough. D for 10 says, Clyde, this needs to be made public in whole, please. Pure gold. So I think what I'm going to do about this, because the Q&A has been so good, like a lot of the information has been so fantastic. Because it really, what it comes down to, it's a YouTube algorithmic thing. I want this information to get out as far as possible. So I have to keep it under a certain time frame. So what I'm going to do is tomorrow, the original chat that we did is going to come out. And then I'm going to post separately the Q&A. So everyone will be able to see that in the coming days. It'll come out available. Of course, if you're a member of the channel, you can view all of the live streams in their entirety at your leisure. Usually you have to be live for the Q&A, but I think this one is going to fit with the exceptions to the rule. And I'm going to make this a separate video as an extension to supplement the original video. Gordo with a 5 says, can regions within province separate? So is that like a separate thing? There have been a sentiment within BC Kootenays that want to join Alberta for a while. So I'm guessing, the lower mainland is very, Team Canada elbows up, that whole thing. And there's a huge chunk of British Columbia that shares the identity and sentiment and all this with Alberta. Is there a possibility that they could partition themselves, break away, and become part of this Western movement?
I mean, anything's possible in politics and negotiation between responsible peoples, but there's no clear pathway like we have for a province. So the province of British Columbia, your premier can enact in your legislature, your parliament, your provincial parliament can enact an act to allow for a provincial referendum. But there would have to be a lot
hold my breath.
happen. Yeah.
Wouldn't hold my breath with him.
What the Supreme Court of Canada has blessed is not a region, like they haven't said, if a municipality, or even let's say a federal electoral district or a provincial electoral district votes to succeed, they can. The unit that the Supreme Court of Canada has described, the political unit, is a province. So any province or all provinces or every province, but only provinces right now under the legislation, the Clarity Act, Federal Clarity Act, as well as the decision of the Supreme Court of Canada, is the unit of measure that can vote. So I fully sympathize with the difficulty. Now, Trump may be very ambitious to get a connection to Alaska through Alberta, which, look at the map. So maybe the lower mainland and Vancouver Island could become like Maine or New Hampshire or Connecticut or something. Ever seen how small Connecticut is?
They're tiny. They're very tiny.
Tiny. Yeah, you could walk across it in a day. So who knows?
Yeah, we'll see how that plays out. D is saying, welcome. We'd welcome you, of course, but there is a procedure, so we'll go with that. Christine Kramer for $13.99 says, as Albertans, we are super excited. How can this message get out to a mainstream media, as we do not feel the East is even aware of the severity of the possible separation? No, they don't know. I would actually go and say that I think a lot of people in Ontario, Quebec, and the Maritimes don't even realize how real this is and how imminent it could be.
They think that because I'm sure when I check my emails, they'll be in there. Because even just sometimes when I tweet about this, I get the hate mail, and they think that I've committed treason. I'm like, well, I just send them the link to the Supreme Court of Canada decision.
Right.
So, yeah, but they don't know. They just think, oh, well, how can this person talk about breaking up the country? That's treasonous, right? Successionist. Well, there's a decision on succession, and it says you can do it as long as there's a referendum and it's clear. So, yeah, they don't know. And I've given up. I've lost all hope for the legacy media, if that's what that person was asking.
Yeah, it really comes down to that.
They've sold their souls. They've sold their soul. And I feel bad for them. I mean, I solved a lot of problems and brought a lot of injustices to light over the years by having the legacy media tell the story of my clients. I've represented a lot of people who were badly harmed by bad oil companies and having water wells contaminated, and bad things happen to their health. And if I didn't have the legacy media covering that, I would have never got the resolutions I did. But that media doesn't exist anymore. It's all a branch. They may as well have the Government of Canada logo on their business cards. It's Elon Musk a couple of years ago, went after CBC, said they were 100% funded by the government, and CBC pushed back and said, well, it's not 100%. And he said, okay, 70%. And then they said, well, it's not 70. He went 69 then, and he left it at that. But it's like, what percentage is it that you don't become compromised? Is it when you're only 30% funded by government that your allegiance to them is stronger because you want to make sure the grant check comes in so that the guy who employs you at Global or CTV can make payroll so that you can provide for your family? Is it 30% before you lose your integrity, or is it 50% or 70%? I don't know, but obviously something's gone terribly wrong. They won't cover the negative stuff about the government. These scandals would have never been able to carry on had the legacy media done its job.
It's funny because I was reporting on this at the time, and I crunched the numbers because it was 70%. It was from their own statements that it was 70% of their income was from the government, and then the rest of where their funding model was from advertisements. And at the time that I was reporting on this, most of their advertising was from the government in some sort of capacity or another to encourage people to go get the vaccine, to do all these things to protect this or that. And it was a massive push for advertising through the CBC. So it was in the 90s percentage wise of how much funding was actually coming from the government. It was just like, where was it coming from at the time? So yeah, you're absolutely correct. You're not going to bite the hand that feeds you. You're going to go with that. Life on life's terms with a $2 super chat. No chat, but thank you so much. Appreciate that. Pale pinkish humanoid. These names just crack me up all the time. For 20 says, what would be the efforts required to change all the contracts and laws to make them US compatible?
Wouldn't be difficult.
It wouldn't be difficult. Like, what would your position be like? Because you're King's Counsel. Well, how would you conform to your position to become an Alberta independent lawyer?
Well, each state has a bar association, and each province has the equivalent in Canada bar association. It's called the Law Society of Alberta, in Alberta. It would just carry on. It would just
so it wouldn't change.
Why would it need to?
And then between the province and the states, the other states that you would be dealing with, because they have differences in contracts, each state would. This is an interstate commerce thing. Would it just remain as it is and not really need to change?
For the Law Society stuff?
I mean, just for like, so, in terms of business contracts, things like that. If business has a contract with another
there'd
business.
be a couple things that could happen. One is people who are parties to contracts could sign an addendum and agree that wherever there's a reference to something in Canada, it's deemed to be a reference to you deem it to be a reference to the United States. So you wouldn't have to, or the country of Alberta. So you don't have to rewrite the existing contract. That happens a lot, where you take existing agreements and you do an addendum and you modify them. Look at all the different free trade agreements and stuff we've done where you just simply modify it. Or you could solve certain problems that are systemic enough through statute. You could deem by statute any contract that provides for X shall be interpreted as Y, or Z, or, I'm trying to avoid details here to be conceptual, to explain that these are the scale of types of problems that you have to deal with as a lawyer in a day, either as a corporate commercial lawyer or a litigator. None of these types of problems are beyond that level of challenge that we face and successfully resolve every day. These are not really complicated things, partly because our culture and our systems are so similar. Like, I mean, when you drive your car to the United States, it's not like you got to pull over and they take your instrumentation out and change your motor because the air is different. It's not going to combust the same. And they got to change your wheels because the gauge of the road's different. Like, you just go through customs and say, see you, and hit the first gas station for the kids.
You do have to drive in miles, though.
Right, you do. And you got to do that conversion. But it's worse for the Americans because they're like, no way, 110 miles an hour. Let's go.
Right on. I'm going to get there quick.
For us,
so would that be the same for the contracts within Canada? So if you have a business that has another business-to-business contractual agreement with each other across the provincial borders, say into British Columbia, it would just be another case of exactly how you described?
there's tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of businesses in Canada that have contracts to do business with businesses in the United States, right? I mean, when's the last time you bought something from the US off of Amazon or something, or had parts shipped up, to the repair shop from the United States? I mean, this is really not that difficult. It's something that some people at different points of the production chain and lawyers and accountants and other will have to put their mind to, and lawmakers will have an opportunity to streamline it, to make it easier and more systemic at a policy level, to avoid people doing it on an individual transaction basis. But we faced all those things before. We didn't have free trade before with the United States until we had the free trade agreement. And even then we had exemptions, like when I brought my motorhome from the US in 2007, I had to pay duty on the air conditioning units on the roof because they were exempt on a schedule, So, I mean, we handle these complexities all the time in our day-to-day affairs.
Fair enough. Life on Life's Terms for two says, what would happen to the national parks? I think we addressed that.
Yeah, the person might have joined later. The national parks are owned by the federal government. The land underneath them is owned by the federal government, unlike the rest of the province, which is owned by the Alberta government, the provincial crown. And they would be part of that mandatory negotiation. Does the federal government want to keep them as federal property? Do we want to purchase them from the federal government? There'd be a whole range of options. Remember that the Supreme Court of Canada has said in the 1998 succession reference case that once there's a clear majority of the residents of a province vote in a clear referendum on a clear question to separate, that the federal government and the other provinces and First Nations become under a positive legal duty to enter into good faith negotiations on the details. And that would be one of the details.
Sherry Bailey asking, how would this work with the military? I think we quickly touched on that, but
yeah, we could say to part of the negotiation could be, for example, that we've got the Patricias stationed at CFB Edmonton, not far from where I sit. Could be part of the agreement that everyone in that regiment would be offered an opportunity to join the Alberta Armed Forces, and would also be given the opportunity to, go to Quebec and join the Vandus or some regiment in Trenton or something, right? I mean,
I think we would have to actually build up a military at this point, right?
Right.
So
well,
it would be starting from scratch.
Really notice, and Alberta would actually have the revenue to do it. And there may be members of the Canadian Armed Forces stationed in other parts of the country that would like to come to Alberta with their families and would ask to be able to leave the Canadian Armed Forces and join the Alberta Armed Forces. So again, these are one of my overall messages is that these are all mostly pretty easy decisions. They're just some mechanics, and it's something that we've demonstrated as a capability of people, as Canadians, as individuals, of citizens of a modern society, that we can manage the decision making and the implementation of change.
D for 5 says this is your best stream ever. So awesome. That's great to hear. I love that the quality of these conversations are just getting.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
It was Buster.
It was Buster. Come on. He'll be on next week. He'll be sitting in my chair. I'll be like, hurry up.
Diane Sylvain for 5 says, will we write our own criminal code? I will help to at least amend it.
Yes.
So that's a requirement, right? Because
that's one of the few things the federal government has jurisdiction to do is criminal law. Mm-hmm. And so if Alberta is a nation state, then Alberta will be responsible for the criminal code. So what it can do as a starting point is adopt in its entirety the criminal regime of the criminal code and the various drug statutes and so on, and other related ancillary Canada Evidence Act and so on, although we do have an Alberta Evidence Act. And then it could say, okay, what goofy stuff in here don't we like? And what is it that the federal Liberals did to it that wrecked it, and change it without having to get Ottawa's blessing?
Fair enough. That's great. Karen Whitelock for 20 says, so you want to have a chat?
What does that mean?
I don't know. I don't know. But
I did mention that I've been happily married for 37 years, right?
yes, you did. And I gave you a congratulations on that one. And
I know you have a beautiful wife as well. So we'll
19 years. 19
See?
years.
There you go. You're trying to catch up to me. I get it.
I know. I'm running behind. I mean, oh, that's funny. I love that. Gary McDonald for 5. Libs have coerced RCMP, CSIS, the media, federal judges, etc., etc. Why not Elections Canada? So
that is what you call as an example of a rhetorical question.
I think so. Yeah.
Somebody trying to make a point that, you know, if it seems obvious to many that the Liberals have corrupted all these other institutions, Elections Canada is an institution. I guess we're going to find out on the 23rd or 28th. 28th. When's the election?
We will. The 28th.
28th. Yeah, thank you.
28th. So it's for all the Liberal voters, it's the 29th. I can't legally say that. It's a joke. It's a joke, folks. It's a joke. It's the 28th.
And it's at the building beside the polling booth.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So next question from Mercedes for 5. This is in response to Ontario and Quebec. They get completely different messaging than we do here. And in Quebec, they will say something completely different in French versus in English. This is well known. This is well established, actually.
Carney's been a great example of it, you know.
Well, he even says nonsense in French, didn't he?
Yeah, well,
didn't he say Mendocino was a woman?
We're going to have an energy east pipeline. It's going to go, and then he goes in French. No, we're not going to have an energy east pipeline.
Well, I'm just laughing because today he said that they asked, why don't you have women in your cabinet? And he says, I have 2 women in my office. He mentioned some other woman and Marco Mendocino.
Well, I can see that, having seen Mendocino perform in person and being in the room with him during the public inquiry in October, November 2022. I could see why he'd make that mistake.
Unbelievable. Oh, it's too funny. It's too funny to be not true. John for 279 says, what about natives? So this we did address briefly before, but you said that it would be up to them to make the choice whether they would make negotiations with Alberta. I'm just trying to get this correct. They would make a choice to make negotiations with Alberta, or what were some of the other choices?
They could either keep things exactly where they are, where they are governed by the federal government out of Ottawa, and they have their treaty rights and their all of their rights under the Indian Act and other legislation, or they could decide, and different reserves could make different decisions potentially, different Aboriginal groups. They could decide that they want Alberta to step into the shoes of the federal government and honor all those commitments, or they could decide they want to negotiate a completely different arrangement. And that's the beauty of when parties enter into good faith negotiations. They can get creative, and as long as they agree and they're otherwise lawful, it would be up to the First Nations to determine their future, as it should be.
As it should be. Yeah, there you go. Jilly Peppers with a $5 super chat says, joining U.S. military would be extreme, but for all we know, Canada could be heading in more United States style of combat and efforts.
You mean like we did in Afghanistan?
Well, we did. We did.
I'm being a little sarcastic and saying, okay, so how's that new?
So yeah, we definitely are with them.
Yeah,
we're
and
with
that
them
would
on a
be
lot
a
of things.
reflection of the decision of the people and the message they send to their politicians.
Yeah, I'm
it's
square with that.
Yeah,
it is. Yeah, it is a fair. Fair question.
We've already been there. We went and helped the Americans, most particularly, and many of our soldiers died in Afghanistan.
So I want to thank you so much for joining us and for this extended Q&A as well, because I know your time is very valuable. So Keith Wilson, Godspeed. Keep up all the good work. I mean, it's fantastic. I love every time you come out of all the busy things that you're doing to stand up for Canada, Canadians, and this time Albertans very in particular. And, you know, to all those other people, the naysayers and all of that, I'm going to say congratulations on all the great work you've been doing. And thank you very much before we end this stream. I want you to stick around. We'll finish out the stream because I want to chat with you for a little bit longer. So big thanks to Keith Wilson for joining tonight. Big thanks to everybody who came out to enjoy this conversation, be included in this conversation, and have some feedback, because this is how we move forward. It's the dialogue that we move forward with. If they don't want to talk to us, we're gonna have a conversation amongst ourselves, and that's kind of what it's come down to. So, you know, it's been a bit of a one-way conversation with Ottawa. It's been a one-way conversation with the federal government. We'll see how that ends up going forward. But there's a lot of people that are just yearning to breathe free, to quote the Statue of Liberty, and people just want to have their liberty back, and we're going to get it one way or another. And I want to thank you for putting up that good fight.
Thank you very much.